Hello and good evening. Welcome. It's February 12th, and this is Happy Hour with me. It is Eileen Cook, and we are here to talk all things crafty on this very snowy day. I was just saying how I was having a little bit of a challenge getting online because apparently even the power are not entirely things. So we'll see if we can keep things going. So it's a quiet group tonight. So I had some things to chat about, but before I dive into that, was there anything that you guys wanted to tackle?
No, nothing.
Dead silence. It's like, no. Okay. Well, what I thought might be interesting to talk about, and I'm curious to get you guys' opinion, is one of the people in the Creative Academy asked me, is it a good idea if you are an aspiring writer, or a writer for that matter, because I think all of us are actually doing it, so it's not so much about aspiring, is it a good idea to write book reviews? And my question is, how do you guys feel about that? Would you be someone who would write a book review on something Goodreads or Amazon?
I recently went through and deleted all my Goodreads reviews that were less than 4 stars.
And why would you do that?
It just seemed unprofessional, and just, I don't know. I felt like when I was a reader, to have reviews was appropriate, but as a writer, it just feels like you're trashing other people if you're not saying anything positive.
There is really, does anyone disagree and be like, no, of course you should be totally comfortable with writing and posting reviews, positive or negative, if you yourself are a writer? Anyone want to throw down, arm wrestle it over? Go ahead, Nicole. Oh, you're muted though. Hang on. Apparently I was like, go on, Nicole, but
There we go. Okay. Sorry about that. Just the only thing I can add is that what I've consistently heard, usually on various platforms, is write something that you like about the books you write about, or don't comment at all. That's all I've consistently heard.
Say something nice or don't say anything else.
Yeah. Support the people or books you believe in, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, what I would say, and I'm going to give you 2 pieces of contradictory advice because I love nothing more than to call things difficult. I don't see that there is a problem with leaving a negative book review if it is a book that you did not enjoy. I would make sure that I was keeping that focused, which is in general, like as an author, I would like everyone to do this, but in general, I would make sure that the focus is on why I didn't like the book. So I had a difficult time connecting to this character, or I found the pacing to be a little bit slow. This would not be the time, even if it's quite funny, to write a humorous review of how much you hated this book, or as some people will do, they will slam authors. Where it like I've seen it become personal with things, which is never a very good idea. Just in general, it's not a good idea. But I would say I understand conceptually that not everyone's going to like my book. And if someone is fair and balanced about that, and in most cases, it's not a case of hating a book, but it was like, this wasn't my favorite thriller of hers, and this is why I liked the others better. Like, that wouldn't necessarily do anything for me. Someone else may feel different. I think the biggest challenge that you come up with reviews is potentially the challenge that you're querying an agent who repped that book. And, you've written a negative review about that book, and she's Googling you because she's, read your query letter and she wants to know more about you. And she stumbles across a review that you wrote where you didn't like some author that she happens to love. Or down the road, you've sold your book and you're seeking a blurb from someone, and you even forgot that you ever, because at least I do, like you forgot that you ever read or reviewed a certain book, and suddenly it comes up like, well, I'm not sure that Susan would like me to read and blurb her book. She certainly didn't care for mine. Publishing can be quite a small industry. So I think there really is something to be said for, if you are thinking about reviewing books online, I would say the bulk of writers that I know have chosen to only review books that they like. So that doesn't mean that 100% of the time it has to be like, oh my God, I loved it. It was the best thing I've ever written. Like, you could still have things where you're like, I love this book. It was really fun. If pacing is really, super important to you, it might not be your favorite because it's a slow burn, or you might do something where you have a little bit of a balance in the review, but overall it's a positive review. Or the idea of nothing that you would feel embarrassed if you actually sat across a table from that person or were on a panel with that person, which is all very likely. I can say I was on a panel once with someone who negatively reviewed my book. Like, I saw we were going to be at a conference together, and so like everyone else, I Google who else I'm going to be on a panel with, and it was someone who didn't like my book. And I can't say that I was like, you know what, we should go grab a drink after this. And I had the feeling that she was wondering and curious to see if I knew that she knew that she had written that review. It certainly, again, it didn't bother me. I see that Crystal chimed in on us. So Crystal, I'm going to ask you this question. If you were on a panel and you realized that someone on the panel had written a bad review of one of your books on Goodreads, would that bother you?
I think it depends if it was mean or if I thought it was like thoughtful and accurate. Like, sometimes people write bad reviews that are like personally scathing and or wrong, which is also, I think that would be really challenging. And I'll give you a real but short example, is that one of my children's books was reviewed by, it was somebody the library reads program, the name of which has slipped my mind because it was like 10 years ago. But it's all librarians and teachers who do the reviews, and it's very heavily weighted for schools and things. And her review said that she really hates books with computer-generated images. And all of the illustrations were hand-painted watercolors that the artist had like burnt the edges on, like actually burnt the paper and then scanned in. And so it was one of those like moments where it was so tempting to argue, but you can't. And so I feel like if it was somebody like that, I would have such a hard time not chiming in. And I would probably be pretty uncomfortable, but at the same time, I'm totally conflict averse. So I just would maybe pretend that it had never happened or it was not a topic of conversation. So just keep things as professional and smooth and not confrontational in a public setting would probably be my inclination.
Which I think is just good advice in general. So I think it is that thing for a lot of people who have maybe not hit publish yet or haven't yet sent something out, where a lot of people are writing book reviews. And so I just think, again, for me, I've made the choice, similar to kind of what you've talked about, Elisa, is that I don't put up a review unless it's a 4 or 5 star review. Simply because it's a small business. I don't want to run into them someplace and have an awkward conversation. There are writers that I actually like a lot as people, as craftspeople, as people who I've heard speak, but I don't necessarily love their books. I don't go out of my way to share that with them. I look at what I can say to them, like, I love your world building, or I love how you think about characters, the diversity in your books. And I think about what I can say to them that would be positive relationship building. But that is a personal choice. So I would never say to a writer, you should not write a book review if you're going to be reviewing other authors. I would just tell you, imagine how you are going to feel if you are, in fact, across from them on a panel in some kind of situation. So things to think about. Oh, go ahead, Elisa.
So this is a little sneaky, but on Amazon, you can change your name. You can put whatever name you want on Amazon. So you can change your Amazon name to
And there are people like, look at you with your double life. You did not hear that deception from me, people. There are certainly many people. And in fact, Amazon does a thing where they have an algorithm where they're sometimes figuring out if you know that person, like if you're friends with that person on Facebook, and they will remove your review if they consider you to have a personal connection. So I've had a ton of my reviews that I wrote taken down because it's like, I know that person, which in no way, in my opinion, means that I don't also still like their books, but for whatever reason, it makes that decision for me. So I have accepted that and moved on. So you could even set up, I'm sure, potentially a Goodreads account where you might have a quote unquote pen name that you review under, and then your own author page where it's what you're doing from that perspective. So that is something to think about. I do think it is valuable to, if you are going to review books, to think about how to go about doing that. And actually thinking about, and I'm going to be writing up just for our resource room in case people would like something, is some thoughts about writing reviews. And it's everything from, thinking about the title and the book cover, like what kind of emotion does that suggest? And then a bunch of kind of questions and prompts. So, what's the point of view? Were there parts that you particularly liked? How would you describe the plot? Who are the main characters? Did you relate to any of the characters in the story? And then kind of your opinion. Did you like the book? If you could change something, what would it be? Did the ending feel satisfying? Because I think that's often some of the things. Did it accomplish what it sort of set out to accomplish? Those kinds of things. So just thinking in a very structured kind of format, as if you were, someone who reviewed books. And there are people who do it who are authors. But I would think carefully about what you're doing. And, as Crystal pointed out, making sure that you're not ever setting yourself up to score a point. And there are people who like to write reviews because they're being funny and they have a personal axe to grind on a particular topic, and they are going to go to town on that particular thing. And you need to think about that. So in the chat window, it's like, any suggestions for best behavior when you interact with someone whose books you've read and you didn't like them? Yeah, actually, I have a couple of suggestions for that. So one is you could potentially say, I haven't had a chance to read your books yet. So and obviously you're very comfortable with lying, Alyssa, so you've already let us know that you have secret pen names. So you could just not acknowledge, or you could talk about the book in particular. Like I read With Malice, like what inspired that book? What made you interested in writing that book? Because again, even when there are writers that I don't necessarily enjoy their book, I find their process interesting. Or what was your experience when that book came out? How did your release go? Are you writing other stuff? Or this book seems so different from your other ones? Or again, even in books that I don't particularly care for, there's usually something in the book that I found, like, wow, what a really compelling cover. Or I really enjoyed that main character. That was really interesting to me. That would be good. Knowing who you're talking to is useful. I think I've shared the story with at least a couple of people. At the Surrey conference, they have a kind of author's room where the authors can go and have a drink at the end of the night and just sort of unwind for a few minutes, kind of away from the hubbub of the conference. And I've been involved with the conference for a long time, so I typically know who the speakers are and so forth. So I was up in the speaker's room, and it was late at night, and people were having drinks, and this lovely gentleman behind me said, excuse me, could you hand me that bottle of scotch? And I said, oh, you're Scottish? He said, yeah. And I said, what's your name? And he said, Ian. And I said, oh, one of my favorite mystery writers is named Ian. And he said, who is it? I said, Ian Rankin. And he said, that's who I am. And I said, bullshit. because I was sure I would know if we had invited him to the conference because I was on the committee. What I didn't know is that he had agreed to be a special guest at that evening's performance that they do. And I had no idea that he would actually be there. So I can't tell you how glad I didn't say something like, have you read that Ian ranking? God, he blows. That guy is so boring. Because it would have been really, really awkward. And the truth of the matter is, most of the time, we don't know what authors necessarily look like. So, it's just sort of, if you are at a conference and you're talking about something, just kind of practicing just general good politeness is probably not a bad idea. Crystal gave me a wonderful segue into the next thing that I kind of wanted to talk about. So thank you, Crystal. Which is, what do you do when you get a bad review? So I am curious how people think they would handle that. So here you have put out blood, sweat, and tears. You have taken months or years to write this book. It's finally out there in the world. Like, you haven't even popped the champagne yet. And somebody posts a review, 1 star, I hated this book. What do you do? Nicole, you're on mute, so you're thinking evil thoughts, but I don't know what they are. Cry. Cry is an option. Crying is a perfectly acceptable option. Bonnie's evil. What are you going to do, Bonnie? It's the same with the bad critique. Fair enough. Anyone else?
I'm not evil. I'm a wimp. So I would just, after I cried, I would try to find something good. I would show it to 300 people who would all tell me I'm great, and then that would be it.
You have probably heard the advice not to read reviews. There are a lot of authors who will just stay away from places like Goodreads and Amazon, because we have a natural tendency, for whatever reason, there will be 300 reviews and 298 of them will be like, I loved this book. One will be like, meh. And then the other one will be like, why, your book is the worst thing on the planet. And we will spend nothing but hours obsessing about the one that said the book was no good. And that'll be the one that we can't stop thinking about and perseverating about. And it can easily derail you and sort of take you off the track. So you want to be careful about that. I'm going to just take a slight segue and talk about the importance of not going crazy train for just a tiny little minute. So I don't know if many people have heard the story. There was a book blogger who wrote a negative review of a book. The author was upset by said review. They started Googling, found out that the book blogger used a pen name, so didn't blog under their own name, hunted down the book blogger, and actually showed up at their house. And was quite upset. And actually the author went quite far, that they were perfectly justified. They kept saying that the book blogger was catfishing them, which the book blogger is not doing. Book bloggers can use pen names, the same as authors can use pen names for sort of privacy concerns. Hunting down a bad reviewer, either online, but especially at their house, is a really, really bad idea. These are the stories that blow up on Twitter and on social media. And, writers are already thought as crazy before things. So please don't add to our reputation of being crazy pants by going off the rails and doing something that is not going to help you, isn't going to make you look good. And let's be honest, is not going to make, basically the person be like, wow, now that I think about it, I really did like your book. I think I'm going to go on Amazon and change my review. That's not what the outcome of that's going to be. It's going to be a restraining order. So don't go down that road in terms of that. So I will give you two answers. One, which is my official answer, which is no, I don't read reviews other than those that are forwarded to me by my agent and editor. And then the truth of the matter is, which is, after a few glasses of wine, I've been known to go on Goodreads before, sort of troll along and see what people are saying and have moments. I do have another writer friend where for a while we were collecting bad reviews, and whoever got the worst review had to buy the other person dinner. So it was almost be like a win when you would get like a really lousy one, because you'd be like, haha, dinner is on her, because yours sucked. I once had a book reviewer roasting party where we had the barbecue going, and we basically made little tiny marshmallow voodoo dolls, and then we roasted them and made s'mores out of people that we didn't particularly care for, all of which I think are perfectly healthy coping strategies. But I do read far less than I used to. And that is, and I'm going to cycle back to this idea because I've been doing a lot of reading around, what we put in our head and what we think about becomes our reality. And so I am trying to make very deliberate choices in my life to choose positive. So that is what I am choosing primarily to surround myself with, because that helps me. Crystal, do you want to weigh in?
Sure. Yeah, I do read them, and I don't so much go on Goodreads, but I read everything on Amazon, but I'm very careful about how I do it and when I do it. And I only read them in batches. I will log into my Author Central account. Maybe it works out to about every month to 6 weeks. But I will only go in there when I am not in a writing phase. So I have to be finished the current manuscript that I'm working on before I will go in and read the reviews. And I do it as part of my, review the process from the last book launch and think about, what I might need to change for this next go round. Because sometimes you can see patterns. Like if I have 9 people who out of, say there's 50 reviews on a book, and there's 9 or 10 people who are saying, oh, I loved it, except this part bugged me, or I didn't want to have to wait for the next part. That was, I hate it when authors do that. If I can find patterns like that, then I know, okay, well, if I do something like this again, the next book has to already be ready before I release that one, or they need to be bundled in a box set so that there's no gap. That's really useful. But I will only do it in batches, because I want to make sure that I have a cross section of maybe there's 50 new reviews in there since last time I was in there, and I can then see overall the tone of things, and you don't get so focused in on a specific one. And if there is, because sometimes people will email me directly through my website, and I've only had one really awful one, which was actually pretty recently. And that it was just delete it and then go back. And I have a happy file, which is I collect all my favorite reviews or emails that people have sent me, and I put it in a happy file. And then if I get something like this lady was just spewing toxic nastiness of you're basically a waste of space on earth, and I can't believe you don't even try as an author, and your stories are terrible, and why would I waste my time or my money, and all of these things. It was oh my God. So I hit delete, and then immediately, then I cried for a little while, and then my husband gave me a drink, and then I went to my happy file and I drank my wine while I read all the nice things that people had said, because I really needed to turn that around and be faced with evidence that this was not what everybody thought. This was what that lady thought, and maybe she had other things going on in her life. And so I try to always think about, where do you have to be in your life where saying something nasty or negative to somebody is what you need to do in your day? I don't want to be that person, but I do want to have a bit of compassion for somebody whose life is not obviously as good as what we're living, because we don't do that. So that's the only way I've found to kind of deal with that, is time it really carefully and then have a coping mechanism / bounce back. I like Eileen's barbecue voodoo doll marshmallow idea, so that's also appealing, but I try to just like focus on the good stuff. I don't kill very many people in my book, so I find it a little more stressful. Yeah.
I mean, I think that idea of understanding that, you know, that you have to have some kind of way of balancing that, and understanding that also perspective is a lot. So I have read some books that other people have passionately loved. And I've given an example before. I don't like the Twilight series. Like I don't find it interesting, first off. Second of all, I think it's creepy as hell that there's a guy who's basically thousands of years old creeping on some girl in high school and watching her sleep and all that kind of stuff. Like, weird, gross. I just think there's a lot that I don't like about that book. 6 million bazillion people love it. There are people who got giant tattoos across their back that are like Team Jacob or whatever, right? So am I right and they're wrong? Of course. But that's not what's important. What's important is that we're looking at that, and I have an opinion and they have a different opinion. And I think I have sometimes given this example in terms of one day I got up, I came downstairs, I turned on my email, blink, there was a message that popped up, and it was from a woman. She was a mother, and she wrote to me and said, my daughter was reading your novel, Unraveling Isabel, and she was so enjoying it. So I picked it up and read it, and it started this huge conversation between the two of us around how she felt about the divorce that we went through and blah, blah, blah. And I just want to thank you for writing such an open and fun book. And I didn't expect to like a YA book, but it was wonderful. And I just had this great conversation for my daughter and I. And I was all like, oh, warm fuzzy. And I kid you not, I had basically barely hit delete when the next email popped in, and it was like, about your book Unraveling Isabel. And I'm like, yes, someone else tell me something more. Nice, right? And it opens up and it's like, this book is horrible. My daughter was reading it. It is disgusting and awful. You're a horrible person. You're possibly a pedophile for wanting to write about teens having sex. I've written to my school board to ask them to remove this book. I've written to your publisher. And I was like, this is a book. Like, how can one person say it's so wonderful and the next person can say it's so awful? But that, in fact, is what it is. One thing I would not recommend, but which I find endlessly amusing, so I am still going to share it as a coping mechanism. I have a writer friend who, when she gets a really, like, as Crystal would say, like, not just a, like, I didn't like your book email, but like one of the really toxic emails, she sends back something that says, "Hi!" exclamation point. I got your email. As you might expect, I'm unable to respond to all emails personally because I'm so busy writing my next book. So please excuse this form letter. I'm so glad you loved my novel. Don't worry, I'm busy writing plenty more just like it. Hope you stay a fan! Exclamation point. And then her name. And then, like, several times the person has written back, like, I wasn't writing to say I liked it. I was writing to say you're a horrible person. And then she sends it again. Hi! Exclamation point. As you might imagine, I'm too busy to respond to all your emails. So it's, that is so not appropriate. You should not do that at all. That's terrible. Don't engage with people if you do get toxic emails, things like that. There's very little to be gained from engaging with those individuals. There are people, it's the same as trolls. If you have a blog or something like that, you are not going to change their opinion. And in fact, if you write back, you're often kind of feeding that sort of toxicity, and they will continue to email because they've gotten a response. And so the best thing you can do is delete, or if you want to pull the email off into a separate pile and put it away, then that's certainly very reasonable. But don't allow yourself to get compelled into it. I know in one case, and I've shared the example before, and I will get into, I like Bonnie went dark. What do you do if they want to kill you? Okay. Let me first just dial that one step back first. So let's say they just wrote a review that was wrong. So I once wrote a book called What Would Emma Do?, which takes place in a fictional town that I made up called Wheaton, Indiana. And in that town, it's a small town, and the book unfolds. And in the review, which was done by Smart Bitches, which is a wonderful website, the one critique that they made of the book was that they didn't like that it took place in Wheaton, Illinois, because Wheaton, Illinois is actually a really big town, and it was described as a small town or so forth. So then there were several people who were, commenting, oh, I hate when authors don't get details like that, right? And so I couldn't help myself. I was early in my career, so I wrote to them and I put on the post like, oh, by the way, it's not Wheaton, Illinois, it's Wheaton, Indiana, which is a fictional town. And Sarah, who runs that website, actually came back and was like, oh my gosh, she's right, I'm wrong. But other people still continued to chime on, how dare you, I correct Sarah and stay out of this, and no one asked you. And also in general now, even if there's something that's wrong in the review, if it's crazy wrong, I once had one review where it clearly was not even my book. Like it was they must have picked up one title. I will pass it on to my publisher if I think it's something that needs to be corrected. But in most cases, if Bonnie's book review doesn't like my book or has it wrong, I'm just going to let it go. If it's a popular blog site, I might write to Bonnie off site and just be like, I'm wondering if you have the wrong title with my name, or if it happened, something like that. So Bonnie, what do you do if you get a death threat? I am pleased to say I have not gotten any death threats. So I don't think it necessarily happens very often. I think that's probably a really good discussion in general about kind of author safety. So whether or not there are things that you want to make sure in terms of, like, do you want to have a PO box so that you're not necessarily mailing advanced review copies from your home address? You'll see in my bios, I typically say Eileen lives in Vancouver. Like, I don't point out that I live in North Vancouver, just because it's a bigger one. People are more likely to know Vancouver, and two, I don't need to be like, and here's where you can find me. So I'm not necessarily looking for that. If someone wrote something like, I could just kill you, I would probably print that out and keep that email to see if anything else came of it. Generally, having worked in mental health, people who are truly disturbed will ramp up for a period of time. So it's not like you get one death threat and then they show up at your door. It's typically something where they'll be sending kind of increased threats. And if I was getting more than one, then that's probably something that I would take to the police department and sort of talk with someone just so that I had it on record and on file. You were going to say something, Bonnie?
Well, I actually had a reason for asking this, was because every time there's a flare-up on the YA world about some book and something that someone imagines some writer has done wrong, it seems to escalate, and these people actually get death threats and violent language. So I was just wondering if there's something in process with a process in place with the publisher where they'll say, hey, we'll take care of all those and we'll contact the police and keep an eye, or is it just more up to you to handle it? I guess that's kind of what I'm asking. Is there a process, or is it you're on your own, kid?
I certainly think if you had like the big massive blowout, like that's something the publisher's going to, if you're traditionally published, they're going to be wanting to talk with you about how to manage that, both from a social media perspective and a publicity perspective, as well as guiding you through anything that you might want to be doing. I do know I went through a stage where I had commented on a blog. Someone had put something about sex scenes in YA, and I had made a post around, which is hysterical because I have no sex scenes in my books. None, right? But I had made a post around, I think there's a wide range of things that are available in YA, and sex is certainly a topic that teens are interested in, so it doesn't surprise me that they're in there. And I think I even had a line still like, but ultimately it's, between a parent and a child about what they're reading. And there was some person who just went off, like, so you're promoting sex between kids, you're a pedophile. He wrote to my publisher to say I was a pedophile. He wrote to like the local paper. He went on all these other blog sites and posted, if you're reading YA books, be aware that Eileen Cook promotes sex between teenagers, blah, blah, blah. Like, and at that point, the publisher did step in and sent him a letter that was basically like, cease and desist, or we're going to take some steps. Like, this is slanderous at this point. And he then went away. So they did sort of step in and help, but their biggest advice to me was in no way write back to him, in no way engage with him. And to be honest, that was the first time for me where I suddenly realized like, oh, like I had just been mailing review copies from me. Like that's when I got a PO box and I started thinking about just exercising a little bit more privacy. Crystal, I think you were going to weigh in on something, or?
Yeah, I was just going to say from a psychological point of view, it's not usually that you're going to jump right into a death threat if you're someone who means it. It's like if you're going to troll somebody on like a YouTube comment equivalent or some random talk big on social media, it's actually less of a concern if it's like somebody you have no engagement with who's just picked you as the next person to kind of spew at. But if it's somebody who has shown a personal interest, engaged with you, and then that is escalating and they're popping up in multiple places where you are, like that's when you need to be more concerned, and you should absolutely notify the police if you have a situation like that. If nothing else, it opens a file and they can direct you to the right pathway of what to do next. And then you've got a record. If you don't act on that stuff and there is no history on file, it's much harder if things do escalate and you need a quicker response or more backup on something. If there isn't a record of it, it's harder to act on that or to get action on that. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think particularly in YA world, for whatever reason, there have been past couple years some really big blow-ups where things get kind of bandied about what people have said or haven't said, and people just pile on. And I, knock wood, have not thankfully been in the maelstrom of that. I hope to never be in the maelstrom of that. But I think if you do, the best advice that they'll typically tell you is to make some kind of statement that you probably want to run past other people, and then just get the heck off social media and stay away until it calms down. And unfortunately, the mob will then take their pitchforks and torches and move on to the next thing that they want to rail against. There's very few cases that I have become aware of. I know there was an author in Australia, and I can't think of her name, who was actively stalked by someone who was not well at all. But in general, like the good news of being writers is that most people don't care that much about us. We're not movie stars, so they don't tend to necessarily become obsessive about that kind of thing. Or conversely, they don't necessarily know what you look like, because most of us have an author photo that's 20 years out of date, and nobody would know what we look like in actual dress-up clothes anyway. When they see us, they're like, who's that? So you're probably, it's not the same kind of intensity that you worry about. But I do think there is some reason to just in general start thinking about, okay, what am I going to do with my private life to keep it private? And again, because I used to work in mental health, it was things around like not wanting my phone number to be available in directory listings and things like that, just, to make sure that I didn't have any of those kind of instances. So that would be some advice there. I do want to just scroll back a little bit, because Crystal had a good idea around just keeping some way of tracking what reviews you're getting. And I think there is some really good merit to that around when I, obsessively go through my reviews. I'm also looking for patterns. And I definitely also have a happy file where I'm pulling out and saving those things. And I would encourage people to have some place that you're saving those kind of positive vibrations, because there are definitely going to be days when you are going to want those and need those. But I would, just in general, really remind people the people review books for all sorts of reasons. So there are people who are reviewing because they genuinely love books and they want to share what they like and what they don't like. There are other people who are reviewing to score points, to, you know, come across as funny or witty or whatever it is. There are some people who review books, I believe, because they secretly want to write books, but they can't. And so they sometimes will go after authors as a way, I think, of doing that. I'm currently reading the book. I've been telling everyone they have to read it, called You Are a Badass. And I put a thing in Glip in there where it talked about, like, when you go after a big dream, when you go after kind of those big, hairy, audacious goals that we talked about, that can be very threatening for other people, because it basically serves as a reminder to them that they have spent all this time building up reasons why they don't go after their own big, hairy, audacious goals. And so they will feel this threat and they will kind of come after your thing. And I think when you write a book, when you put a book out into the world, sometimes that's threatening to other people, because it's something that maybe they wish they had done. So be aware that it could have nothing to do with your book. It could have to do with the fact that is not even, again, the book is just a personal thing. I remember one agent talking about the fact that she couldn't stand this one book because the hero's name was Kevin, and the guy who like ruptured her heart in junior high and like dragged it behind his car was named Kevin. And so she could never read a romance where the guy's name was Kevin. And all I could think of is somewhere there's an author who was like, he could be called Carl, like didn't have to be Kevin. You know, like there are just certain things for some of us where it's like, oh, I hate books that are this way or that way. And it really has very little to do with the book, and it's just our own personal thing. So knowing that's out there, and then deliberately making the choice to surround yourself with things that are going to feed your soul. So the reviews that remind you why you write, the reviews that charge you up, that remind you what you're good at, that get you to put your fingers back on those keyboards, those are the ones you need to hang on to, because that's what's going to keep you writing. So that's the important part. Other questions about writing book reviews, dealing your own book reviews, or actually anything at all? It's all quiet. All right, well, thanks for your patience. I don't know what the intertubes issue was right there at 5, but eventually it all came together. So, and it didn't cut out. I don't know if you guys were watching me obsessively watching my bars of internet here, but it stayed on. So hopefully my hunch is I heard a big snap pop around 4. So I'm suspecting some wires went down somewhere in our neighborhood, because it's we got a lot of snow. All right. So until then, I'm going to stop recording. I'm going to wish everybody some happy writing. I will be back tomorrow morning for happy hours, and we are going to be talking about story beats. So if anyone's interested in that, that will be tomorrow mornings. Until then,